Section A, getting started, defining the task, clarifying the assignment.
So you've just gotten your assignment. What's the first thing you need to do to start writing?
Fall on your knees and pray for forgiveness?
No. First you need to figure out your assignment. Your assignment is going to tell you what to write about and how to write it. That's why it's really important for you to understand your assignment inside and out.
Your assignment is like a map of where you can take your paper, and the closer you follow its directions, the better your chance of getting an A on your paper. So ask your teacher if you have any questions.
Let's go to Nathan's assignment and see what questions students in his class have. Now, if you ever want to look at Nathan's assignment more closely, just look on the insert card labeled Assignment.
Nathan's assignment asks him to write a 4 to 6 page paper due 3 weeks from today. His first step is to think back to an environment he's been to, like his home or workplace. Or he can go to a place like a park or library. And he must spend some time observing people at this place or spend time thinking back to what it was like.
Now let's go back to Nathan's assignment and look at the second step.
The second step is to consider the questions the professor listed. The questions are, how do people act there? And, do some people act differently from others? Then the professor gives an example of a place, a college party.
Next, the professor spits out some questions in relation to this hypothetical example. Let's take a look at them.
Do freshmen act differently from seniors? Do women act differently from men? Do certain men act differently from others there?
So Nathan's going to be observing how different people act in different ways at the place he chooses. Let's check out the third step.
It says he must define the social dynamics of this place by describing how people look and act. He'll have to use his own observations and analysis to describe the environment. After Nathan's taken some notes on his observations, he'll analyze why people at this place act the way they do. His professor again goes back to the college party example and lists some hypothetical questions. Like, do freshmen cower in the corner? Are seniors the center of attention? Why or why not? The professor then lists 2 general questions. Are there social rules that guide this place? Certain things you can or can't do.
Looking back at the assignment sheet, we see that Nathan will also be making an argument. He'll be taking a position on this environment. The professor gives a sample argument based on the college party example. Seniors are the most powerful people at a college party because of such and such. And then the writer would describe why he or she thinks that seniors are the most powerful people at a college party.
So let me get this straight. You want us to pick a place, watch what happens there, describe how different people act, analyze why people behave in these different ways, and then make an argument based on our descriptions and analysis of this place.
Yes!
So let's look at the last paragraph where Nathan's professor has summarized the assignment.
Nathan's going to be constructing an argument based on his observations about how and or why people interact in this specific setting. He'll support his argument with description and analysis of his environment. Notice he must also support his argument by using 3 sources. He must draw some conclusions about how and why people behave a particular way in this setting.
We'll dance these aspects of the assignment in front of you again, just to make sure you're clear. First, the assignment requires Nathan to use both description and analysis. He's going to be stating his position on the particular setting and backing it up with evidence. His evidence will be his own observations and analysis, as well as some research to back up his personal experience. Let's look at the last part of the assignment.
Nathan's teacher has bulleted a list of things his paper must have: a specific thesis statement stating his position, a clearly delineated original argument with observations and supporting evidence. He also has to have a logical organization with transition sentences, accurate citation of supporting evidence, and proper use of spelling, punctuation, and grammar.
But it's not as hard as it sounds. The bulleted list we just told you about matches the general characteristics of academic prose we talked about earlier. And these traits are important, so be sure these characteristics get shipped over to your paper. Let's go over each of these requirements on the assignment sheet.
First, a specific thesis statement stating your position.
Remember, the thesis statement is the main point you're making in your paper. You state as specifically as possible your position on the topic you're writing about. You support your position or thesis statement through your argument. The second bullet point says there must be a clearly delineated original argument with observations and supporting evidence.
For Nathan's assignment, his argument will be based on his own observations, as well as some research as supporting evidence. The third bullet on the assignment requires him to have logical organization with transition sentences. So Nathan will have to make sure that his logic is clear and that he uses transition sentences. Remember, transition sentences serve as signposts that guide your reader from one idea to the next. The last two bullets are accurate citations of supporting evidence and proper use of spelling, punctuation, and grammar.
Nathan will need to make sure he gives credit to others for their ideas and cites them correctly. He'll also need to use proper spelling, punctuation, and grammar. He can check a writer's handbook to make sure they're done right.
That's it for the requirements of the assignment. It would behoove Nathan to check his paper throughout the process of writing it to make sure he's met all this criteria. Remember, it's absolutely vital to your grade and your sanity that you understand your assignment. Next, we're going to look at
Getting started.
So the next thing Nathan's got to do for his assignment is figure out what he's going to write about.
Well, I do have some ideas of what to write about, but I think I know what I want to say, but at this point, I don't know how to say it, so I'm a little scared.
Probably anyone who writes knows this feeling. You have some ideas, but you don't know how to say them. That blank page or screen can become a monstrously intimidating figure when you're trying to get started writing.
But there's a key to getting started. Don't worry about getting it right the first time. Remember, you're not doing brain surgery here. You can always go back and fix your mistakes. The primary reason most people can't get started is that they censor and criticize their writing too much. Let's say you sit down at your desk and you have an idea of what you want to write, but every time you try to write it down, it doesn't come out right.
You can't think of the right word to use. You don't know if a comma should go here or there. You're not even sure if you should begin your paper like this. You're thinking about so many things that you finally give up in disgust and attack the nearest person.
You can't think of writing that way. Very rarely can you express a complex idea well the very first time you put it down on paper. That's one of the reasons it's so important to think of writing as a process. Things are going to be chaotic at first, but if you keep working at it, your paper will gradually all come together.
A good way to get started is to do a free write. Free writing is one of many ways of keeping you on track towards your destination, completion of your paper.
To do a free write, you write without stopping for a short period of time, like 10 to 15 minutes. You just sit down with a pen and paper or a computer and write non-stop about whatever you need to write about. The only rule is that you must keep writing constantly without censoring yourself.
What if I can't think of anything to write?
Then you write, I can't think of anything to write.
When you're doing a free write, you don't need to worry about spelling, punctuation, or grammar.
The point of the free writing exercise is to get your thoughts down on paper.
Once you've got something written on the page, then you can begin to be more critical of what you've written and worry about your organization and grammar.
And don't forget,
You can use free writing throughout the writing process. Anytime you need some help getting your ideas on paper, you can do a free write. So let's go back to Nathan's assignment. Remember, he's asked to write about an environment in his past. He first needs to figure out what setting he's going to use.
That night, he sits down to do a free write. Here's what it looks like.
He starts not knowing what to write. He writes, I can't think of anything to write. Can't think, can't think. Notice, he goes through a number of places he could write about before finally arriving at his high school. He starts with the first place he was born, then goes to the house in the suburbs and the video store.
when you're trying to decide what to write about, you want to think about two things: the demands of the assignment and what about the assignment interests you. Let's go back to Nathan's free write.
Next, he thinks of a fishing spot, but it would fail to meet the demands of the assignment because it doesn't have much social interaction and because he bets not much research has been done on the social aspects of a fishing hole. He then tries to think of a place he's been to a lot. Notice he thinks, maybe a friend's house or a room at my home, but he decides not to because it sounds boring.
So Nathan's selecting his place by what's feasible, given the demands of the assignment and what interests him. Towards the end of the free write, Nathan thinks of another place he's been to a lot.
Yeah, I was just like racking my brain, you know, the video store and the fishing spot and the home I grew up in, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks. High school.
So at this stage, Nathan's picked high school as his environment. He might change his mind, but that's the direction he's going in.
So he's completed the first step of the assignment. He's figured out what he's going to write about. Before we can go into the next steps of the assignment, we'll need to introduce some more terms.
Now, as you start to consider the direction of your paper, there are a few things you need to meditate on, regardless of what type of writing you're doing.
First, your purpose or objective in writing. Second, your audience or who you're writing to. And third, the format of the paper. These three factors determine what you're going to say and how you're going to say it.
The form your thesis statement takes is based on these three factors. What do we mean by this? Well, let's get our hands a little dirty and take a closer look at each of these terms. We'll use Nathan's assignment to help clarify them.
Your purpose is why you're writing. You want to ask yourself, what do I plan to accomplish with this paper? You may want to describe an experiment on osmosis you've conducted, to argue your position on the origins of the French Revolution, or to research your family history and show people how fascinating or dull or weird or raised by wolves your ancestors were.
Nathan's purpose in writing is to make an argument based on his observations of the place he's chosen.
Now, if his assignment had asked him to describe a personal experience about this particular environment, then he would use a story structure with descriptive words to show his reader what his place is like. If he'd been asked to do a research paper, then he'd need to spend time researching the history of that place and the people who lived there. In each of these instances, Nathan's methods and format would change because his purpose was different.
Closely related to one's purpose in writing is being aware of one's audience.
Your audience is whoever will be reading your piece of writing. Your purpose in writing is to manipulate your audience in some way. You might want to persuade them to your opinion.
Macaroni and cheese tastes better if you use swirls instead of elbows.
Or inform them about something.
Cheese is made from cows.
Or just entertain them.
It's important to remember that what you write about and how you write it depends upon who your audience is.
Think of a party you've been to lately. Now imagine writing one letter about going to that party to your best friend, and one letter as an assignment for a class. You would probably tell your friend what you actually thought about there and what happened. You would probably have some grammatical errors and a conversational tone throughout it. With your teacher, you would probably leave out certain details that happened, and you would have no grammatical errors. The whole letter would be much more formal.
So you can see how your audience has a huge effect on what you write and how you write it. Let's go back to Nathan. His audience is his professor.
I am so special. How would you like some special tutoring? How can I resist when you're so special?
Since his audience is his professor, he'll have to use a certain language and style appropriate to the academic environment. Let's go back to his free write about high school.
Notice the slang in several places, like watch lots of movies and lots of stuff there. Also, neither of these is a complete sentence, and Nathan would probably be counted off if he turned in a paper with sentence fragments like these.
Now is when it's really important to know your audience. Yes, you are writing for a college professor, but there are many different types of college professors.
Your teacher might be a nerd or some stodgy English teacher who hates any use of slang or first person. Other professors see the sole use of academic language as phony.
Bring it on!
I'm gonna dice you like a tomato, Grandma boy.
Ask yourself other questions about your audience. Am I going to be offending them with some of the language I choose? Will they know the terminology I'm using, or should I define it?
You see, you just got to know your professor and what he or she is looking for. If your professor is a stickler for grammar, then spend extra time on it. On the other hand, if your professor looks really closely at your organization, then be sure to spend more time on that part of your paper. And if you're not sure if you can use first person or slang or whatever,
Then get up off your couch and go ask your professor. Don't just sit in your dorm room and stew.
Just remember that you're writing in order to manipulate your audience in some way. And to do that, you'll need to know your audience well. If you were to offend your audience, you just tick them off rather than persuade them to your opinion.
So the first two factors are purpose and audience. The third important factor you need to consider is the format of your paper.
The format of your paper is shaped by your assignment, as well as your purpose and audience. Like a floral designer does for flowers, the format of a paper describes how a paper should look and how it should be arranged. Watch me arrange these flowers.
Format includes stuff like the page length, the size of the margins, or the font size your paper should use.
I once wrote a paper for a different class in 38-point New Courier font. The paper was 5 pages long, but it only had 8 words.
Format also includes the style of documentation you should use and other types of materials that might be needed, such as charts or photos.
The format of Nathan's assignment is an essay. It doesn't require him to have charts or photos, but he could if he wanted to. He could maybe add a chart of the different groups in high school. Remember, even though your professor will always be your audience, you should look closely at the demands of the assignment. You should spend time throughout the creation of your paper and checking it over at the end to make sure it has the right format.
So we've talked briefly about purpose, audience, and format. These are 3 of the primary factors that will shape your paper. Remember, your purpose in writing is your objective. It's why you're writing or what you're trying to achieve. Audience is whoever will be reading your paper. Format refers to what your writing should look like. All 3 of these factors influence what you write about and how you write about it.
Now, Nathan needs to decide how to mesh his high school environment with his assignment. So he's going to do another free write based on the purpose, audience, and format of the assignment. The best way to do this is to go back to the assignment and circle, underline, and mark up places that refer to the purpose, audience, and format of your assignment. You do this because it would really bite to have written a bunch of stuff only to find out you misunderstood the assignment.
I once needed to write a paper on the structure of the American government. I wrote about cement and pillars and wood. It was very embarrassing.
We'll start with purpose. A good way to figure out the purpose of your assignment is to look for key words. What are key words?
Well, there's please and thank you. Oh, and pardon me.
Actually, these are words you can use as a guide for what the professor's looking for in the assignment. Some examples of keywords are criticize, prove, and summarize. These keywords shape the way you write about your topic.
For example, if Nathan was asked to summarize his high school environment, he would write very briefly, about a paragraph or so, the main points about high school.
So let's go back to Nathan's assignment where he's marked up his assignment in several places. We'll look at a couple of the keywords he circled, like define. Define means, well, you're defining something. You're setting the boundaries of or giving distinguishing characteristics to whatever's being defined.
Nathan's going to be writing about the distinguishing characteristics of different high school groups.
He's also circled describe. To describe something means you're giving a detailed account or painting a verbal picture of the thing being described. And let me tell you, that verbal family, they make a pretty picture.
So Nathan's going to be painting a verbal picture of the social groups in high school. He'll be using description of these groups to show the reader the different kinds of high school groups.
Marking important places on your assignment can clarify your assignment and raise any questions you might have. Nathan circled some keywords to help him figure out his purpose in writing. Now let's look at his second free write. Remember, in his second free write, he's writing about purpose, audience, and format.
Nathan begins with his purpose. He has to figure out how and why people interact the way they do in this particular setting.
He's beginning to get some ideas and figure out his objective for the paper. Let's go back to the assignment.
We see he has to describe how people look and act. He also has to analyze why people act the way they do.
So let's see how description and analysis materialize in his free write.
He remembers there's lots and lots of cliques in high school. The popular kids are beautiful, nerds are smart, some are just socially inept, and others are just plain creepy. He also realizes that most people are in the middle and don't fit into any group. He sees that he's being too general and will need to classify these people into subgroups by their behavior. So at this stage, he's beginning to form a thesis for his paper. he'll look at how these groups are divided and why.
His paper is starting to take shape.
I am really excited to be doing a paper about high school. I wasn't exactly a nerd in high school, but I wasn't too popular. I wasn't exactly a jock. And I wasn't too big with the girls. But writing this paper should be an interesting experience.
So Nathan has now found a purpose or objective for his paper. He's going to describe and analyze the different groups that form in high school and explore why cliques form. Next, he writes about his audience.
His audience is his professor. He thinks his professor is a little strange, but he's going to be able to use some slang to show what groups are like. He's going to have to balance conversation and slang with academic style. His professor also expects him to find some research on his topic.
So that's it for audience and purpose. Nathan puts an end to his free write by looking at the format of the assignment.
Nathan writes that the format of his paper is an essay, at least 4 pages double-spaced. He'll have to go into lots of description on different groups to define the social dynamics of high school. He must have a specific thesis with an original argument and clear organization.
So he knows the length and structure of the paper. There are a couple of other format issues that the professor listed on the assignment sheet.
Nathan must use some supporting evidence, and it must be cited accurately. His paper also must use the proper spelling, punctuation, and grammar.
So that takes care of Nathan's free write about purpose, audience, and format.
So Nathan's done 2 free writes. His first one was to get him thinking about what he'd like to write for this assignment. He thought about what he's personally interested in and what could work with the assignment. Once he had an idea of what he wanted to do, he did a second free write. In this free write, he thought about how he could make the setting he chose, high school, fit the demands of the assignment. His second free write looked at his purpose, audience, and format for the assignment. He thought about these 3 factors by marking places on his assignment sheet that related to them. By doing this, he formed a direction for his paper to go in. So you can see how spending just a little time free writing can get you on the right track. Now when Nathan sits down at his desk to start writing, he'll have some ideas to begin with instead of just sitting there staring at a blank piece of paper or screen.
Before we actually begin to look at writing a first rough draft, we're briefly going to discuss 2 more important steps in the writing process: getting feedback on your preliminary ideas and using journals. Both getting feedback and using journals can make your final paper better.
Getting feedback on your plans from the teacher or others can be very useful, since others might catch any potential flaws in your ideas.
So lavender ink is a bad idea. Yeah. Oh. No, that wouldn't be good.
Regardless of who you talk to, it's much better to work out potential problems now.
And just because you get feedback now doesn't mean you can't get feedback throughout the writing process. In fact, you should get continual feedback from others as your paper progresses. We're going to talk even more about getting feedback a little later in the tape, once Nathan's written a rough draft.
There's a second thing that you can do at this stage of the writing process that'll make your paper better and keep things purring like a kitten throughout the writing of your paper. It can be very helpful to keep a writing or research journal. Many English composition classes will require you to keep a journal.
Don't get this confused with a diary. A diary is a book you keep personal thoughts and experiences in.
In a writing or research journal, you keep track of your progress and thoughts on a particular assignment or class.
Remember, like Lassie and like training wheels, a journal is there to help you. As we said at the beginning of the tape, writing is discovering what you think about your world, the class you're taking, or the assignment you've been given. A journal is an effective way to record the discoveries you make. A journal can help you in several ways.
For example, as you research your assignment, you can write down your thoughts on a particular article you've just read.
This is far more effective than just reading it and underlining, since it helps you get your own ideas down on paper.
Journals are also a good place to work out your ideas.
Sounds crazy, but a great way to figure out what you want to write is by writing. Journals are a lot like free writing in this way. Journals can make it lots easier on you when you start writing a draft of your paper. You'll have lots of ideas when you actually sit down and start writing, And it only takes a minute to write a paragraph in your journal since you're writing for yourself.